November 14th, 1929. 2:47 a.m. The Chicago River, black as motor oil under a moonless sky. 3 bodies surface near the Clark Street Bridge, their hands bound with telephone wire, faces unrecognizable from the methodical work of ice picks and brass knuckles. By dawn, the Chicago Police Department has identified them. Vincent, the accountant. Moretti, 34. Giuseppe Sabella, 29. And most shocking of all, Thomas "Tommy Two Guns" Ferrara, 42, Al Capone's personal bodyguard and one of the most feared men in the Chicago outfit. The kind of man who walked into rooms and made conversations stop. The kind of man you didn't touch unless you had an army behind you or a death wish. But here's what makes this particular triple homicide different from the hundreds of other mob executions littering Chicago's streets during the blood-soaked final years of Prohibition. Tommy Ferrara died wearing a wire, a crude but functional recording device strapped beneath his undershirt, still there when the coroner cut away his waterlogged clothes. 6 hours earlier, that device had captured every word spoken at a secret meeting in a Cicero warehouse, a meeting where Al Capone himself had outlined his plans to eliminate Meyer Lansky's bootlegging operation in New York, to consolidate control of the rum-running routes from Canada, to become the undisputed king of American organized crime. The question that gripped Chicago's underworld wasn't who killed Tommy Ferrara. That much was obvious. You don't betray Al Capone and die peacefully in your sleep. The question was, who had turned Scarface's most loyal soldier into a rat? And more terrifying still, what had those 6 hours of recorded conversation already cost? 9 months earlier, February 1929, Thomas Ferrara wasn't supposed to be anyone important. Born in Palermo, Sicily, immigrated to Chicago at age 7, with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a mother who took in laundry to keep him fed. By 15, he was running numbers for Johnny Torrio's outfit. By 20, he'd killed his first man, a rival bootlegger who'd made the mistake of shorting a whiskey shipment. The hit was clean, professional, untraceable. Torrio noticed. When Torrio handed the Chicago operation to his protege, a scarred Neapolitan immigrant named Alphonse Capone, Tommy Ferrara came with the deal. This was 1925, and Capone was building an empire on 3 foundations: bootleg liquor, gambling, and an absolute, bone-deep understanding that loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Tommy Ferrara embodied that loyalty. He drove Capone to meetings in bulletproof Cadillacs. He slept on a cot outside Capone's bedroom door. He'd taken 2 bullets meant for Scarface during the North Side gang wars of 1926. Everyone in the Chicago outfit knew that Tommy Ferrara would die for Al Capone without hesitation. That's what made his betrayal so impossible to predict. But in February 1929, something changed. FBI Special Agent William Bill Madden, a veteran of the Bureau's fledgling organized crime division, made contact with Tommy Ferrara through an intermediary nobody saw coming. Tommy's younger sister, Maria. She was dying of tuberculosis, confined to a charity hospital in the South Side, drowning in her own lungs because she couldn't afford the experimental treatments being developed at the Mayo Clinic. The treatments cost $7,000. Tommy Ferrara, despite pulling down $500 a week from Capone's operation, didn't have it. Gambling debts, women, expensive tastes. It all went as fast as it came. Agent Madden made the offer over coffee at a diner 6 blocks from Maria's hospital. The FBI would pay for the treatments. Tommy would wear a wire to Capone's meetings and report the details of every major operation. Just information. Nobody asking him to testify. Nobody putting his name on official documents. Just intelligence gathering to help the federal government build a tax evasion case against Capone, the same strategy that had worked against Johnny Torrio. Tommy Ferrara said no. not because he had any moral objection to turning informant, but because he understood the mathematics of betrayal better than most men. If Capone found out, death would come slow. They'd keep him alive for days, asking questions between the pliers and blowtorches, making sure everyone in Chicago knew what happened to rats. Maria Ferrara died 3 weeks later, choking on blood and fluid, her hand clutching her brother's sleeve. Tommy was back at Agent Madden's door within 48 hours. The deal was struck. The wire was fitted. The recordings began in early March. The operation, March to November 1929. For 8 months, Tommy Ferrara lived a double life that would have broken most men in half. By day, and often by night, he was Capone's shadow, the trusted enforcer who knew every secret, attended every high-level meeting, drove Scarface to sit-downs with politicians and rival gang leaders. By early morning, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., he'd meet Agent Madden at rotating locations across Chicago. Empty warehouses, closed diners, once even at a cemetery. He'd hand over the recordings, accept his payment. Madden made sure that money went directly into an account to cover Maria's funeral expenses and outstanding medical bills, and receive a fresh wire for the next day. The intelligence was extraordinary. Tommy captured detailed discussions of Capone's bootlegging network, which moved 50,000 gallons of illegal liquor into Chicago every week. He recorded conversations about payoffs to police captains, aldermen, even a circuit court judge. He documented Capone's expansion plans into New York, his negotiations with Detroit's Purple Gang, his violent suppression of the remnants of the North Side Gang following the St. Valentine's Day massacre in February. That massacre, 7 men machine-gunned to death in a garage on North Clark Street, had shocked even Chicago's violence-numbed population. Tommy Ferrara had been there for the planning sessions, had heard Capone laugh about it afterward, had recorded every detail. Agent Madden believed they were building towards something unprecedented, a federal case that would dismantle the entire Chicago outfit. But by October, cracks were showing. Tommy started drinking more, sleeping less. The wire left marks on his skin that he had to explain away as a rash. During a particularly tense meeting where Capone pistol-whipped a suspected informant, Tommy's hand shook so badly he spilled his drink. Capone noticed. Said nothing, but noticed. The other problem was more fundamental. Tommy Ferrara had started to feel something dangerous. Guilt. Not about betraying Capone. He'd made peace with that the day he agreed to wear the wire. Guilt about the men he'd helped set up, the soldiers in the organization who'd end up in federal prison based on his recordings, guys who'd shown him nothing but respect and loyalty for years. Men with families, with kids, with no idea that every word they spoke was being preserved on wax cylinders and transcribed into federal evidence files. Agent Madden saw it happening and made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He accelerated the timeline. Instead of spending another 6 months gathering evidence, he pushed for one final comprehensive recording session that would capture Capone's entire strategic vision in a single conversation. Then they'd pull Tommy out, relocate him to California with a new identity, end the operation before it imploded. The opportunity came on November 13th, 1929. Capone had called a meeting of his top lieutenants at a warehouse in Cicero, the suburb that served as his personal fiefdom, where local police worked directly for the outfit. The topic: consolidation. Capone wanted to discuss eliminating competition in New York, specifically Meyer Lansky's bootlegging operation, and restructuring the Chicago outfit's entire command hierarchy. Every major player would be there. Agent Madden gave Tommy Ferrara a new wire, more sophisticated than the previous models, capable of recording for up to 8 hours. Tommy fitted it that morning in a bathroom stall at Union Station, his hands steady, despite the lack of sleep, despite the knowledge that this was either his last day in the life or his last day alive. The meeting. November 13th, 1929, 6 p.m. The warehouse was cold, deliberately so. Capone believed cold air kept men alert, kept them from getting comfortable. 18 men sat around a table made from planks laid across sawhorses. Nothing fancy, nothing permanent, nothing that suggested this location mattered. In Capone's organization, it was the men who mattered, not the places. Capone sat at the head, wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most Chicago families earned in a year. The famous scars on his left cheek, courtesy of a bar fight in his youth, caught the light from bare bulbs hanging overhead. He was 30 years old, controlled an organization worth $100 million annually, and had personally ordered the deaths of at least 33 men. Tommy Ferrara stood behind, and to the left, his usual position. Close enough to intervene if trouble started, far enough to observe the entire room. The wire pressed against his ribs, a constant reminder of the precipice he'd been walking for 8 months. Capone began with business updates. Numbers from the speakeasies. Revenues up 17%. Gambling operations. Stable but facing pressure from the Jenna brothers' remnants. Bootlegging. Canadian supply routes secure, but Detroit wanted to renegotiate profit splits. Standard operational discussion. Nothing Tommy hadn't recorded a dozen times before. Then Capone shifted gears. He dismissed the lower-level soldiers, reducing the room to just his inner circle. 7 men, including Tommy Ferrara, Frank Nitti, Jake Guzik, and Tony Accardo. What came next was the most comprehensive strategic session Tommy had ever witnessed. Capone laid out his vision with the clarity of a military commander. The Chicago outfit controlled the Midwest, but that wasn't enough. Prohibition wouldn't last forever. Public opinion was shifting. Politicians were losing their nerve. When it ended, the organization needed to be positioned to pivot into other revenue streams. Labor racketeering, political corruption, legitimate businesses that could be used for money laundering. But first, they needed absolute control of the remaining bootlegging years. The obstacle was New York, specifically Meyer Lansky and his partnership with Lucky Luciano. They'd built their own distribution network, their own political connections, their own muscle. Capone wanted it eliminated, not through negotiation, not through intimidation, but through systematic destruction. He outlined a plan to ambush Lansky's rum runners along the Lake Erie routes, to bribe federal agents into raiding Luciano's warehouses, to spread rumors that would turn the New York families against each other. It was ambitious, ruthless, and it required perfect operational security. Which is why, 43 minutes into the meeting, Capone asked a question that stopped Tommy Ferrara's heart. "We got any rats in this room?" The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Capone smiled, let it hang there, then laughed. "I'm kidding, boys. If I thought there was a rat here, we wouldn't be talking. We'd be digging." The other men laughed, relieved. Tommy Ferrara laughed too, the sound hollow in his own ears. The wire kept recording. For the next 2 hours, Capone detailed his plans. Names of politicians to be bribed, names of rival bootleggers to be killed, specific dates for specific operations. It was everything Agent Madden had hoped for, enough to bring federal charges against not just Capone, but his entire command structure. The meeting ended at 11:38 p.m. The men dispersed to waiting cars. Tommy Ferrara drove Capone back to his Lexington hotel headquarters, helped him to his suite, stood outside until Capone dismissed him at 12:47 a.m. Then Tommy drove to the predetermined meeting location, a closed meatpacking plant on the south side. Agent Madden was waiting with 2 other agents. Tommy handed over the wire, along with handwritten notes detailing everything the recording might have missed. Madden was euphoric, already planning the federal raids, the indictments, the headlines. He told Tommy to pack a bag, that they'd move him to a safe house by morning, that he'd done an incredible service to his country. Tommy Ferrara drove home, packed nothing, and waited for dawn. He'd stopped believing in safe houses somewhere around October. You didn't betray Al Capone and get a comfortable ending. The only question was how much time he had left. The answer was 6 hours. The unraveling, 2 a.m. to 2:47 a.m. The problem wasn't sophisticated counter-surveillance or a planted mole in the FBI. The problem was much simpler. Giuseppe Sabella, one of Capone's lower-level drivers, had been early to pick up his boss from the Lexington hotel. While waiting, he'd seen Tommy Ferrara's car heading in the wrong direction, away from Tommy's known address, toward the Southside Industrial District. Curious and bored, Sabella followed. He watched Tommy meet with 3 men in suits at the meatpacking plant. Watched Tommy hand over something small. Watched money change hands. Sabella didn't know what he'd seen, but he knew it wasn't right. He called Frank Nitti from a payphone at 1:15 a.m. Nitti didn't panic. Panic was what got you killed in this business. Instead, he made calls, pulled together a team, including Vincent the accountant Moretti, a man whose specialty was extracting information from unwilling subjects, and Sabella himself. They found Tommy Ferrara at his apartment at 1:47 a.m. Tommy didn't run, didn't fight, didn't deny. He'd been carrying that weight for 8 months, and part of him was almost relieved when it finally came due. They took him to a slaughterhouse in the stockyards, one of a dozen anonymous buildings Capone's organization owned, for exactly these purposes. Vincent Moretti asked the questions. Tommy Ferrara gave the answers. All of them. Every meeting with Agent Madden, every recording, every detail he'd provided. When Moretti asked why, Tommy told him about Maria, about the hospital, about the deal he'd made to save his sister's life. Moretti nodded, almost sympathetic. Everyone in the outfit had family. Everyone understood what you'd do for blood. Understanding didn't mean mercy. They worked on Tommy for 3 hours, making sure they had every detail, every name, every possible connection that could trace back to the organization. When they were satisfied, Frank Nitti himself delivered the coup de grace, a single bullet behind the right ear, professional and quick. Tommy Ferrara died at 2:31 a.m., 16 hours after his final recording. But they couldn't just dump one body. Giuseppe Sabella had seen too much, knew too many details about the discovery. He joined Tommy in the river. And Vincent Moretti, who'd done the interrogation, who now carried the knowledge of every detail Tommy had spilled, represented a liability Nitti couldn't tolerate. The ice pick that had worked on Tommy's face worked just as well on Moretti's. At 2:47 a.m., 3 bodies went into the Chicago River, weighted with engine blocks, their hands bound with telephone wire. The aftermath. The bodies surfaced at dawn. By noon, Chicago's newspapers were running the story. By nightfall, the FBI had raided Agent Madden's office, confiscating every recording, every document related to the Ferrara operation. The official statement was that the investigation had been compromised, that no charges would be filed based on tainted evidence. Agent Madden took early retirement 3 months later. The recordings mysteriously disappeared from federal evidence rooms. No indictments were ever filed based on Tommy Ferrara's 8 months of cooperation. Al Capone learned about the wire at breakfast, reading the Morning Tribune while eating grapefruit in his Lexington hotel suite. He'd already known. Nitti had reported the previous night's events at 4 a.m., but seeing it in print made it official. His reaction, according to witnesses, was a shrug. Tommy had his reasons, Capone reportedly said. Doesn't mean I had to let him live, but I understand it. The Chicago outfit didn't collapse. The New York operation Capone had outlined never materialized. The intelligence leak had made it impossible, but the organization adapted. Within 2 years, Capone would finally face federal justice, not for murder or bootlegging, but for tax evasion. Tommy Ferrara's recordings had they been admissible, might have put him away for murder. Instead, he got 11 years for not paying taxes on money the government couldn't prove he'd earned illegally. Frank Nitti took over operations while Capone was imprisoned, and the Chicago outfit continued to thrive for decades. The lesson of Tommy Ferrara's betrayal became organizational gospel. Trust no one completely, watch for signs of weakness, and always, always assume someone might be listening. The legacy: Tommy Ferrara's grave in Mount Carmel Cemetery, paid for by the FBI from the Cooperation Fund, bears a simple headstone with his name and dates. Nothing about his service, nothing about his sacrifice, nothing about the 8 months he spent walking a tightrope between two kinds of justice. In the decades since, his story has become a case study in the impossible mathematics of loyalty and betrayal. He made a choice driven by love for his dying sister, a choice that cost him everything. The information he provided could have reshaped American organized crime, could have prevented countless deaths, could have altered the trajectory of Prohibition-era justice. Instead, it ended with 3 bodies in a river and a bureaucratic cover-up. The wire Tommy wore that final night, the one the coroner found still strapped to his waterlogged corpse, sits in an FBI evidence locker somewhere in Washington, D.C., a museum piece from a time when one man's courage and one man's desperation nearly toppled an empire built on beer and blood. November 14, 1929, taught Chicago's underworld an enduring lesson. There are no clean endings in the life, no perfect escapes, no redemption that doesn't demand a price. Tommy Ferrara paid that price in full. Whether it bought him anything beyond a federal burial plot remains a question that haunts the intersection of law and lawlessness, where good intentions meet brutal consequences, where the only certainty is that the river keeps its secrets until it doesn't. The Chicago River, black as motor oil under a moonless sky, has given up thousands of bodies over the decades. Most are forgotten, their stories lost to time and tide. But 3 bodies from November 1929 still whisper a warning across the years. Loyalty, once broken, cannot be restored. Trust, once betrayed, demands payment in blood. And the wire that promised salvation delivered only an early grave.